Right,
That's what I meant by closed.
Right.
De-energized. And it
right,
gives-
you're exactly right.
And it gives you your limp mode.
Bingo, that's exactly where I was going with that. That's one of the two components I need for limp home mode. What is the other component? So I got two solenoids that I can de-energize that will allow hydraulic fluid to flow through my valve body. Right, Chris? What else do I need to have a limp home mode? What's that?
Lockup.
Negative. Actually, I'm glad you said that. If I'm in limp home mode, do I have the TCM, the transmission control module, online?
No.
Okay, if the transmission control module is not online, what happens to lockup?
It's not mechanically.
Say that again?
It's not mechanically.
No, I'm not mechanically coupled, I'm in a hydraulic coupling, right? Because if there's no electricity, because the TCM's offline, the solenoids that are normally closed, meaning they need energy or electricity to open, will close, exhausting their passages, so I lose lockup. Now, that's critical when deciding whether you want to try and continue an operation of this bus or not, because that torque converter is not designed to be hydraulically coupled in sixth gear. Right? During normal operation, how fast am I going when that torque converter comes out of hydraulic coupling? Just an estimate.
10 miles.
About 6 miles an hour. Okay, now, during electronic failure, we lose lockup, right? Because we lose electricity to the solenoid. Now, if I'm on the freeway, dead heading back to the yard from South County, which I think our last stop is right prior to Las Pulgas there at that Carl's Jr. bus stop.
Cristiano's trestles.
Okay, that's pretty,
Trestles. Yeah, for your surfers, trestles.
yeah. So I'm pretty close. That's not far from Las Pulgas. Okay, almost Camp Pendleton. Okay.
Nixon used to live right over there. Cotton's at a house there. President Nixon.
Okay. So if I'm over by Nixon's house
Yeah.
and I have a failure, I'm down the freeway, 6 fails to 5th. Okay. That transmission's torque converter is not designed to be hydraulically coupled in 5th range at road speeds of about 50 miles an hour. Okay. So what are we generating a lot of in that particular situation? Heat. Now, we're going to be generating beaucoup heat. Are we going to get a indication or a warning that the transmission's overheating?
No,
Why?
TCM's out.
because it's offline.
Bingo. So you're attempting to drive back from the trestles in 5th gear down the freeway. That's about, what, 13 miles from here? Give or take?
How many miles?
Maybe more, but more than that.
Yeah, more than that. That's like.
25, I don't know, I haven't been there in a while.
I'd say 30.
Okay, so you're attempting to go 30 miles at about 55, 56, because you ain't going to get to road speed when you're not in lockup, hydraulically coupled. So your engine's turning high RPMs, you're generating beaucoup heat, not a good idea. So going back to my initial question, what other two components do I need to get my limp home mode? Chris nailed the normally open solenoids, I need something else though. Latch valves. C1, C2 latch valves. Without those, in the hydraulic system, when you put the bus in gear, the solenoid is momentarily open to allow hydraulic pressure to move the C2 latch valve, and then through fluid flow through the C2, the C1 latch valve will be moved into position, one up, one down in reverse, neutral, and first. And then as we shift, the C2 latch valve moves up, which would allow an alternate path flow to a predetermined clutch set in the event of a failure using the two normally open solenoids and the latch valve position. So when you have a failure, you are a one-speed mechanic hydraulic transmission. You do not shift. And you're coming home in whatever range you failed to. So first fails to third, third, fourth, fifth, fail to fourth, sixth fails to fifth. So whatever range you're in when you have your problem, that's what range you're coming home in. Now what happens if I shut off the bus? Let's say you have a failure and the radio says, pull over to the curb and shut off the bus and attempt to restart.
It won't start.
Okay, why?
No neutral
Because
switch signal.
That's your first problem. And the second is, once you shut off the motor, what happens to my hydraulic pressure?
You lose it.
So what happens to my latch valves?
You disengage.
That's exactly right. I'll take disengage, they reset, whatever you want to call it. So you're stuck in the water. Okay, so going back and shutting off the batteries and turning them back on may or may not help. What our mechanics do on road calls, they go to the circuit breakers that control power supply to the TCM and check them, and a majority of the time they're tripped. They reset the circuit breaker, TCM comes back online. You at least now have a neutral signal, the ability to start the bus, and most importantly, the ability to put the bus in gear. Because in a power failure, is your selector pad active? You can beat on it all day, nothing's gonna happen. We good? How many clutches I gotta have engaged to move this vehicle?
2.
2. Now, do I use the rotating clutches in every range that transmission is designed to go into?
All except neutral,
And
reverse.
bingo, reverse is 3 and 5. Good job. And neutral is C5. How many neutrals does that transmission have?
4.
4. Don't find them. I went to certified, said I had 4 neutrals, so I took the bus to the top of Signal Hill and I rolled it. Just before I looked up from 4, I hit a tree. I can see that happening now with this class. I know some people that are, let's just say if they were a light bulb, it'd still be a dark room. Not the brightest bulb in the chandelier, that's for sure. All right. If I have 2 inputs into a, well, can I have 2 inputs into a planetary gear set?
Yeah.
Yes.
If I have 2 inputs into a planetary gear set, what does the slower of the 2 inputs act like?
3 wheels.
No, you're thinking of the stator.
Yeah.
What if I have 2 inputs? Let's say I got a sun gear rotating and a ring gear rotating, and the ring gear is rotating slower than the sun gear. 2 questions. What does the ring gear act like, and what is my output?
The slowest.
The ring gear stationary.
Right, what was that?
The slowest acting member holds or act like a holding member.
And so if the ring gear is acting like a held member and the sun gear is the input, what happens?
Sun gear becomes input, or it takes over.
Sun gear is the input, but what, okay, so I've got a ring gear rotating slower than the sun gear, it's acting like a held member. I've got the sun gear rotating as the input. What happens? What do I got? What's next?
The planetary gears.
Output is what?
Planetary.
Bingo.
Opinion, whatever.
Planetary, or, yeah, planetary gear set, planetary. So there's a sun gear, pinion gears, ring gear, and carrier that hold the pinion gears in their position.
What
Commonly
happens
called.
if you have 3 clutches applied at the same time?
Oh, what happens if I engage 3 clutches at the same time?
Yeah, parts.
I have parts. I have many parts. And if I get it on film,
No, you're in overdrive, I mean, you're in lockup.
well, technically that question is correct. Because I could have a C1, a C3, and lockup. C1 and C3, I believe, puts me in second.
But how do you get it into 3 clutches? How would that happen?
Mine, not using lockup, it would have to be an electrical failure or a short to another solenoid that's not intended by the engineers.
Or a stuck solenoid.
Or, yeah, well,
When it
no.
was applied, it didn't come off when it was supposed to come off.
Yeah, but see if it does that. Now, in the older transmissions, you could put a 3rd clutch engagement on. On the newer ones, you'd log a diagnostic code. Good point, Frank. You'd log a diagnostic code because the off-going ratio didn't disappear, and it'd simply go back to that range. And for that exact reason, so we don't throw a 3rd clutch on. And we'll talk about that when we get into troubleshooting in a couple of weeks. But yeah, older transmissions, if that regulator valve's stuck, the next one comes on, 3 clutches engaged. I don't know if you want to call them spare parts, but parts.
Parts.
Because there wouldn't be a whole lot left you could probably salvage. Boy, that'd be fun to watch though. Probably sound pretty horrendous. Let's go get a rental.
Like that when I found it.
We'd have to use a stolen credit card though, because if we used our own and we fouled it up, they'd use our credit card to fix it. Or just use a maxed out one. Just saying, not like I've done this before. What's that?
Premeditated, huh?
Yeah, we planned it.
Driving on a bus is going to.
Is that like a question that'll be on a test?
What's that?
If you lock up 3 clutches, what'll happen?
It could be.
So that wouldn't exclude the lockup clutch, right? That's just on a.
I will explain which clutches that. Okay, you're in second gear at 9 miles an hour and you engage 4 clutches. No, that's a valid question. Actually, that's a valid point because technically you're correct. There are 3 clutches engaged when you're in lockup. Okay? There are 3 clutches engaged when you're lockup. The 2, more than likely a rotating clutch and a stationary clutch with the exception of overdrive. Now, why didn't I say reverse? Do we ever go into lockup in reverse? No. Better hope not.
I remember the VS2 transmissions used to shift gears in reverse.
I lost $100 on that transmission when I first started working for Long Beach Transit.
Somebody bet you that it would shift in reverse?
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
And then they proved it. So we went out on Anaheim Boulevard at Cherry about 1 in the morning. And we're backing up about 25 miles an hour, and that son of a bitch shifted. And to make matters worse, he took my C-note. So of course I had to get it back. So the next new mechanic came on board. I did the same thing. Got my C-note back. So no, it will shift because wasn't it like a semi-automatic? Because we had VS2s that didn't have the switch. We literally had a lever, and so when you're trying to engage it in the morning, it's grinding like hell.
No, ours were all electrically operated.
You had the switch?
We had to switch.
Yeah. Okay.
We still have one, 1201,
Yeah.
or 201 they call it.
See, we didn't have Grumman's, we had GMC's, and they had a 2-speed automatic V-drive, but it had a lever, drive, neutral, and reverse.
730s, our RTSs had a lever and a cable that went 40 feet back.
Yeah, but see, that wasn't a VS2, that was a 730, that was a 3-speed automatic. All right, are we good on, now at this point in time, guys, you know how an automatic works, okay? You've got the theory of operation down. From today forward until the test, we're just gonna talk about auxiliary components, okay, like the retarder. You can have a transmission without a retarder, okay? We get into electronics, obviously you gotta have that, but I mean, as far as where you're at in this thing today, you should know how an automatic works. 2 clutches must be engaged. I can have multiple inputs into my planetary gear set, but the slower of the 2 acts like a held member. If I've got sun gears as inputs and planetary gears as the driven as outputs, I've got a little gear driving big gear. So I've got my lower gears torqued. If I've got big gears, C2 clutches engaged, turning my P2 carrier, so I've got a big gear driving a sun gear, I've got overdrive. Right? And the way I get power through the gear set is I simply start off with an input, a held member, and an output. And through most ratios, that output is the ring gear to the preceding planetary. Okay? So you saw how I have secondary 2 inputs into the next planetary gear set, and the second input, the slower of the 2, acts like a held member. So that planetary gear set moves power forward to the P3 where I've got a sun gear spinning, a ring gear spinning. The ring gear acts like a slower member, acts like a held member, and the P3 planetary becomes my output at whatever ratio was established earlier on. Because remember, the planetary gear sets are like those Russian dolls. They stack inside of each other. So my P2 planetary gear set is attached to what? Let me back that up. I'm sorry, wrong question. My P2 ring gear is attached to what? Negatory. Negative. There's only one other one left, guys. The P1. P1 planetary gear set has the P2 ring gear attached to it. The P2 ring gear rides, or the P2 planetaries ride inside of it. What's attached to my P2 planetaries?
P3 ring.
My P3 ring gear. Where is the P1 ring gear?
On the clutch.
First base.
It's a station, it's, what? It's a,
First base on first.
no, he's on second. No, it's a standalone ring gear. Can't see it in here. It's a standalone ring gear in the case for my P1 carrier. P1 has a standalone. Attached to P1 is the P2 ring gear. Attached to P2 planetary is the P3 ring gear. So if I'm rotating my P2 planetary gear sets, I'm also rotating my P3 ring gear. That's exactly how it works. The transmission will set up a dual input to get to the ratio it needs. When I engage my C2 rotating clutch, I connect my turbine shaft to my P2 planetaries, okay, which starts rotating my P2 planetary gear set, which starts rotating my P3 ring gear. At the same time, I'm rotating my P2 sun gear, and since the P3 planetaries are rotating slower than the P2 sun gear, the P2 planetaries act like a held member. The sun gear is the input, P3 planetary is the output, or P3 sun gear is the output. I mean, I'd like to be the guy that thought of all this stuff, man. Freaking genius. Right? Probably had many headaches, and this would be before the day of aspirin, so maybe I wouldn't want to be the guy.
And you're talking about the Brazilian brothers that figured it out.
Mid-30s, they came up with this concept. Small motor car company bought it. General Motors. Ripped them off. Big time. They didn't get nothing. They sold it, and that was it. No residuals, no royalties about it. Can you imagine the dough they'd be making today? Well, not them, they're probably dead, but their family. Man, astronomical. And that was the birth of Allison. General Motors spun that large Allison off. They were the first one to
So
put
they
an automatic
got
trans-
it in the, they came out with the technology in the 30s, but Allison wasn't back. That didn't, oh, it was around then?
Allison, before they made transmissions, were making engines for the P-51 Mustang. He built Indianapolis Motor Speedway, had the first factory team racing there. Built parts for the Liberty ship engines. I mean, he was a company before it was transmissions. Yeah, he had his fingers in a lot of things. He built an OK motor for the P-51. The problem was it was carbureted. Carbureted engines don't fly well upside down. So the government contracted with a small British engine manufacturer to build a fuel-injected 1,200 horsepower motor. Called it the Merlin. Huh?
BMW.
Rolls-Royce, man. You gotta go big. So Rolls-Royce built the fuel-injected 1,200 horsepower motor for the P-51s. Imagine the Japanese Earl surprise when it flew better upside down. It was a P-51 that shot down the first jet. Flown by the Tuskegee Airmen, a black squadron. They were the best pilots in the war. They called them Red Tail because they had a red tail on the plane. Those guys could fly. You ever get a chance, you should see the documentary on that squadron. They had the best kill ratio in the war. It's pretty awesome. All right, so we talked about how the transmission gets us moving forward. Now we're going to talk about how it helps us stop. Wait a minute. How's that happen? Well, after today, you'll know. You've all used it if you've driven it. It's a retarder. See, this is the only time I can say retarded and not be in trouble. All right. So the retarder's job is to assist in stopping the vehicle. Now the key word here, folks,
Assist.
it does not bring you to zero, does it? It disengages at about 3 miles an hour. Why? If it brought you to zero, you'd stall every time. Probably. You could. It assists in controlling the vehicle downhill speed on a steep grade. Extends the life of the service brakes and enhances vehicle control. And that's actually a fair representation of its job. There's no advertisements here. That's exactly what it does. Okay. It assists in stopping the vehicle. Okay. So you've got some components. Doesn't have four-wheel steer. want to block your face so the cops don't see it. Yeah, you just gotta look through there. No, he's got a picture of, the cops are looking for somebody, right? And it's like his twin brother. He's got a picture of it, and his driver's license is next to it, you can't tell them apart. So he's like, he's gonna be running out of the arcade going,
I'm just thinking that it's nice to be able to have that broad sense of personal space right now.
yeah, well, you know, he can always move back. All right, housing. Stator. Rotor. Control valves and an accumulator. Okay? Those are your major components.
Well, where is this thing attached to there?
Good question.
Is that in the
From the wanted fugitive. The reward out for you yet? How much is it? Because I mean, I've got a threshold, so don't worry. It's got to be pretty good, then I dime you off, right? $100, you're like, that's what they think of you? Really? I'd be offended. All right. So the fugitive asks, where is the retarder bolted to? And it's right here. See, it's on the back of the transmission.
Oh, so that's like this right now.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's the exact orientation. What you're looking at in this cutaway is this portion of it. Okay? And so this will be right over here. Actually, right in here. This is a different model. This comes from a different transmission, not a 400, but its purpose is the same. This comes from a smaller transmission. So it would ride right here. That would ride right there. And this is this component right here. This is splined to the output shaft. So when I rotate my output shaft, it rotates with it. Okay?
This is stationary.
That is stationary in here. This is right here. So this is what this looks like when you look on the inside of it. Now, you can see this had a bit of an issue. Got hot. Overheated. Started destroying it. This is supposed to be this color. Nice and bright and shiny. It got hot. Someone told me, one of the guys at Car Shop said it got upwards of 500-600 degrees. Got a wee bit toasty. Okay? We all cool on the arrangement? Okay? And you can see on the side here, there's passages for hydraulics. So this is a standalone self-contained unit. I can take and bolt this up to the back of this. I can order this transmission without a retarder at some time in the future. If I decide I'd really like to have one, I can order one up, pull the back of the transmission off. I would get a new output shaft with a new P3 planetary gear set in this housing. The whole retarder assembly would simply slide onto the back and bolt in. I'd have to change my electrical harness, and then I'd have to tell the transmission control module to use the PCS5 solenoid as the solenoid to engage the retarder, because it's already there.
You have to shorten the drive shaft since you're lengthening the transmission.
Yeah.
Possibly, depending on the application. In our application, most assuredly. But some trucks, depending on how much room you have inside the driveline, you may be able to get away with it. Because it only adds about, I don't know, 6 inches? I don't know, I'm not good at measurements, but from whatever this side of the housing is to here. So what is that, maybe a foot?
Our drive shaft doesn't.
Our drive shaft's about that long. There's not a lot to it. There's not a lot of room back there in that coach for, we're about maxed out in
It's in the
space.
back.
Huh?
Forget it's in the back.
You're thinking of the school buses.
Or cars.
Cars. Yeah.
The drive shaft on the transmission, does it slide into the back of the, no, it doesn't.
It looks just like this.
So it's bolted, so when you're hitting dips and things, it's not going in and out like you normally have to.
No, it is going in and out.
Oh, it is, it is.
Well, if that drive shaft didn't move, you'd either do two things.
Yeah,
You pull it out of the yoke,
yeah,
or you ram it into the transmission or
Yeah.
break the transmission.
because you usually have to have so much space there to allow for that, right?
When we get into module 9, we'll talk about drive lines and the need to.
You're 6, that'll be 9. We'll talk all about driving.
No, that's all right. Curiosity is good.
It's a good question.
Curiosity is good. You must have a drive line that can compensate for suspension travel. So when you hit a bump and the suspension moves down, it's got to grow. When you bottom out, it rams it up into the wheel well, it's got to compact. And it has to compact not to the dead end of its stop,
Yeah,
because now and we've done that when we first repowered some of our articulateds from a 50 series Detroit to a Cummins. We didn't accommodate for the extra room, and we split 2 transmissions in half because the drive line, when it bottomed out, was bottoming out the drive line and then beating this up. And then snap it. And that was the transmission, not the drive line.
That's why they call that part of the drive line the slip yoke.
Yep.
Because it can slip in and out.
Because you have the same thing on your Ranchero. Your drive line can contract or expand depending on your suspension.
yes, yeah.
Okay. All right. So these are your components. And that accumulator, and we'll talk about that later on in class, but what this accumulator does is provides the initial charge of oil into the retarder housing. Instead of having to wait for the charge pump to fill it, we have a solenoid, or an accumulator with a solenoid that would inject or provide air into the accumulator, force the charge of fluid out of the accumulator into the retarder housing, and then that buys time for the charge pump to continue to fill the retarder housing to meet my needs. So the accumulator gives me instant response to retarder request, as opposed to waiting for the charge pump to fill the housing.
Where's the accumulator?
Where is that?
That is not sitting here today, but on the bus, it would be mounted on the chassis very near the transmission.
Oh.
Okay, so it's an external.
Yes, good, thank you. That's a good point. It's external to that transmission. My bad, I should have said that.
And how many stators? Is it just one stator for the retarder, one stator for the torque converter?
Oh, good point. Do not get the two mixed up. Completely forget about the torque converter today. I'm glad you said that. They do absolutely, completely different things. The stator in the torque converter redirects flow back into the pump, right? The stator on the retarder simply catches oil. That's all it does. I'm glad you said that. So during the test, when you read a question about a stator, make sure you understand what component we're talking about. Are we talking about the retarder, or are we talking about the torque converter? The only thing they have in common is the name. The function is completely different.
That accumulator has a air regulator on there?
It could. That's a great point. It could have an air regulator.
Now, that air regulator, when you attach it to the accumulator, does it just come off the shelf already calibrated?
No. Great point. And we had that problem. We were getting regulated. First thing we had a regulated air supply to the accumulator, and it wasn't working. It just didn't give us the response we needed. So we just went straight systems air pressure to the solenoid and into the accumulator. Now, if you have a regulated air supply, and we initially started out about 95 pounds, and you're replacing the regulator on the bus, make sure it's set to 95, because it coming out of the box, you don't know. You just don't know. Okay? Great question, because some agencies will run a regulator. They'll have, and we'll talk about how you turn this thing on, they'll have a retarder on, but they'll regulate the power supply, because sometimes they regulate the air supply in the accumulator because they don't want to come on too harshly. Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so there are your parts. Stator, rotor. So the stator, the rotor is installed into the stator. There's the rotor, which is that piece there. Okay. You guys have that in your book, right? Jiminy Christmas.
Hello.
All right. Wow.
It's right here.
All right, now. So the housing is this guy. Or actually, housing, rotor installed in stator, and the rotor. So it looks like, when we look at it, here's your P3 planetaries. So when I buy a retarder to install into my transmission, because all of a sudden I say, hey, I really would like to have that, you will get this component here, and those P3s will be hanging off of it. Housing, rotor. Rotor is splined to the output shaft. It rotates at road speed. Okay? If the output shaft is turning, my rotor is turning. So it's basically a sandwich. And if this were the right size, it would be bolted up. Something similar to that.
Well, why is this how it's small?
This is from a different transmission. Okay, this is from a different transmission. Okay, so that's how it works. Housing, rotor, stator, transmission. If the transmission output shaft is turning, so is the rotor. Okay? Let's go ahead and set this down. I don't want to fall off. Let's yeah, good idea. Thank you.
Safety first,
Yep.
not last.
Oh. All right, get those mixed up. Especially when you go to the shooting range, safety last, and they're like, get out. The hell happened? I was at the range Saturday. Some dude was firing off a freaking hand cannon. I don't know what it was. But holy cow.
Got everybody's attention.
It did. It was like, ba-boom! I was like, wow. Now, so the rotor is splined to the transmission output shaft and therefore is driven at output shaft speed. The rotor is splined to the output shaft and rotates at output shaft. Okay, so catch it.
Take Freddie's head off.
Huh?
Was
Was that the put you see in the Olympics?
Yeah.
Oh, it did, it's reward.
What's that? You would be making the company provide a large donation to the Chris Damien Retirement Fund. I could have got that if I just walked through the doors when the elevator car wasn't there. I'm already ugly, I already walk funny. I mean, it might have even been an improvement, depending on who you're talking to. It would have sounded bad, I'm sure. Of course, I wouldn't have heard it, I'd be too busy screaming. So retarder, stator, rotor, and housing all have internal vanes or integral vanes. The rotor rotates between the stationary stator and housing. So we got to have two walls to make this work, right? This is one wall, this is the other, and the stator's right in the middle. These do not rotate. This is stationary, this is stationary. The rotor is rotating between them. Right here. Housing.
And that's rotating because the planetary 3 gears are moving it?
This is rotating because of, the planetary gear set. Two clutches engaged, moving power through the transmission, finally to the P3 planetary gear set, and my output shaft rotates. Okay? If it's rotating, so is my stator, right here. Okay? I'm sorry, so is my rotor. You got me all mixed up. You just step out of the room.
That's asking.
Like if I was in college and the professor said that, man, you wouldn't see me. Be gone. Come home, my brother's like, short class, no, kicked out again.
Don't tell mom.
Mom knew. I don't know how moms know, they know. It's a mom thing. Came home from school, appendix acting up, what are you, a doctor? Yeah. Okay, you're to the hospital. That's cool. All right, you see how the relationship is, right? Here, housing, stairs. I want that back, it's aluminum, I know what you're thinking. So that's why they want him. He's one of those guys.
Call the sheriff.
Call the sheriffs. Hello, Sheriff Dan. Have I got a deal for you? I'm gonna wait till your reward value goes up though, man, because I need a new truck.
My blue book value right now is still low.
Oh, you want a high mileage, guys? I gotta drive me off there. I ain't getting nothing for it. I ain't calling you. No. Now, so the retarder rotor. Now here's where I could get in trouble. Retardation occurs. You have way too much to drink. When the retarder housing is filled with transmission fluid and pressurized. So as I'm cruising down the road and I let my foot off the throttle, I'm going to fill this housing with fluid opposite the rotation of the retarder because I want that fluid to be caught by the cups. Okay. Now, the activity inside this housing is not smooth. Very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Active. I got it. Huh?
Volatile?
It's just very turbulent. There you go. That's the word. My dictionary is not working today. It's very turbulent, and it's that way for a reason. Because I need as much resistance offered up against this rotor against rotation. Right? So by forcing fluid into the retarder cavity against the rotation of the rotor, or the rotor, it's going to get caught up in these torus cups and slow this thing down. So remember when we talked about brakes, we use the mechanism of friction between the pad and the drum that created heat, but it also absorbed momentum, right? It's a law of conservation of energy. You can convert it and change it, but you can't destroy it.
Now, when you're applying brake, you would also get an indication on the top panel that the retarder's working, right?
You may. Some
And
properties.
you may not.
Correct. Some properties have it programmed that when the retarder's on, a light comes on the dash that says retarder's on.
Right.
Okay? Some properties don't. I don't think our property has a retarder indicator light on the dash that lets you know when the retarder's on. It may just turn on the service brake emblem to indicate that you're slowing down. I was driving the other day and I never looked. You know, because I'm not a professional driver. So I just, when I'm driving,
Once we let it off.
well, that light comes on. Okay, so we do have a way of indicating the retarder's on.
And the
Now,
lights are on.
I think I know where you're going with this, and correct me if I'm incorrect, but you're thinking, well, if I let off the throttle and the light doesn't come on, can I use that for troubleshooting the retarder?
Yes.
Yeah, actually you can. If I'm driving and I let off the throttle and I don't touch the brake and that indicator doesn't come on, that means your retarder's not activating. So that's a
Well,
start.
The reason I say that is because I had a bus where I did a road test, and it would sometimes come on and sometimes it would not. So I noticed that it could be a solenoid probably sticking or something.
I would go with that or loose connection. Probably loose connection. And it's usually going to be
Loose connection on the solenoid.
in the valve body where, because you got to remember that harness rides in hot transmission oil all day. So over time, with all the vibration, shaking, and whatnot, just from routine driving, do this long enough, one of those wires is going to break, or the connection's going to,
Oh, yeah.
and then you have this intermittent problem, which is what it sounds like you're describing.
So the retarder looks like it's all fluid that slows.
That's exactly what it is.
Slows the speed.
It's, to put it bluntly, it's a hydraulic brake. They use them on roller coasters.
Just pressure.
Just pressure. It's exactly right. It's pressure.
That fluid, is it just on this
Once it goes in the housing, it just fills it up.
And that's it.
And that's it. But because it's so turbulent, anytime molecules have to change direction, and we're thinking about this at a molecular level, that oil is moving around. So you got molecules colliding into each other, generating heat. So the retarder, while it's doing its job, generates a tremendous amount of heat. You got to remember, I'm doing a class of physics here. I've got mechanical motion that I'm stopping. So I have to take that mechanical motion and do something with it. So what I'm doing is I'm converting it to heat energy, and then I'm dissipating the heat energy. So I'm taking the mechanical energy, and through the force of hydraulic oil striking this rotor and slowing it down, it generates heat energy, which is dissipated through the transmission's cooling system. So once again, I'm turning mechanical energy into heat energy. The brakes do the same thing, different mechanism, right? The brakes use friction from shoe to drum. That creates friction, and at the same point, to create that friction, it absorbs mechanical energy, and then the friction produces heat and is absorbed or dissipated through the drum. And the bus slows down, providing we can generate sufficient friction and heat to stop the bus in a timely fashion. To assist in that, I slow the driveline down using hydraulic oil striking the torus cups, creating heat, which is changing the mechanical energy generated by using the driveline. Because remember, when I'm off the throttle, the engine is no longer propelling the vehicle. So the minute I let off the throttle, the driveline is now working backwards. In essence, it's now turning here. Y'all see what I'm saying? And by offering opposition to rotation here, it slows the driveline down, which slows the differential down, which slows the axles down, which slows the road wheels down. We good? Questions?
So,
What was that? You're that student. And as a result of this fluid striking here, heat is generated. If heat wasn't generated, this thing wouldn't slow down. Physics wouldn't work from a physics point of view. If I could do this and not get hot, I'd be making retarders and I'd be making millions. But because of physics, very turbulent, think of it like a friggin' hurricane. That's basically what's going on there. You've got all this fluid changing multiple directions because it's striking these torus cups, it's striking these torus cups, and it's striking these torus cups in addition to this one. So it's hitting here, going there, going all over the place. And because of all that movement, it makes it difficult for this to rotate in that environment. And because of that, with all these changing in directions, and fluid colliding with fluid, creating heat, we slow down. Taurus cups. Ford Taurus cup.
Okay.
No, I'm not being funny. That's how it was explained to me. It's better than the Escort, right?
that's only got me.
I don't know where. Taurus is actually a astrological sign. That might be where they got it from. Horoscope. Thank you. Zodiac sign. No, I'm not the Zodiac killer. Hey, I'd be like way over. Zodiac killer was in the 70s. I was just a wee little lad back then. No, actually, no, I wasn't. I was in high school at the end of the 70s. I was still short and ugly though.
You said it.
And I'm damn proud of it. Takes a lot of work to be this ugly and not get killed. Alright. So the retardation occurs when the retarder housing is filled with pressurized fluid. Okay? So to get things going, so you're driving along, Lorena, and you let your foot off the throttle because you don't want to hit little Jimmy. Well, actually, you might, depends how little Jimmy is. Actually, you don't, because then it's chargeable. Right? So it goes. So yeah, you don't want to hit little Jimmy. So you let your foot off the throttle. Now, we'll talk about inputs here in a bit. The transmission control module sees various inputs that tells it, hey, Lorena's not throttling up, she's not cruising, so she must want to stop. So it decides the retarder cavity is initially filled by that accumulator. Got fluid on one side, got a diaphragm in the middle, and air pressure, when applied, will force the fluid out of the accumulator directly into the retarder cavity, giving you your initial charge of fluid to start you slowing down. Then, depending if it's like a long slow down a hill, once that initial charge is used up, the torque or the transmission charge pump will have had enough time to continue filling the housing to meet your retarder needs. If it's, oh, I'm just stopping at the light, and you stop, you let off the throttle, and you apply the brakes, and you come to a stop, you may have only needed that initial charge from the accumulator, okay? And then when you throttle up and the retarder's not in use, the transmission will refill that accumulator for the next stop. We good? Wow, no questions? You guys are experts, man. I'm gonna get you all jobs at AMCO. Double A, NCO. I can't believe those guys are still around. Everybody I've talked to that's ever gone there has nothing nice to say about it. It's probably not a good thing.
Money pit.
And you don't get any deals there. When I had the transmission put on my Impala, that was the most expensive place to go. Actually, the best place to go to get the transmission was General Motors. They were the cheapest. Obviously. Huh? Yeah. I went to Harbor Chevrolet when I blew the transmission out of my